It's June the 19th, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. I'm Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Malikan. Hi, Brendan.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. And today we're talking to school committee challenger John Trobaugh.
Hello.
John, welcome to the 508 show. Welcome back to the 508 show.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Yeah. So we generally ask the candidates the same kinds of questions, and we get very different answers from them. But I'll just start off and say, why are you running? How have you been active in public life in Worcester until now?
So the reason I'm running is really for my two kids now. I think that I'm able to make a difference, and I think that there's a need for some new voices on the school committee. I think that I can provide that. I've been active in Worcester, I guess political and otherwise, since I've been here, which is 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
8 years ago, 8+, I ran for school committee and was on this show back then.
Mm-hmm.
And actually have been politically active ever since. I didn't win that first run, obviously, but I think that was one of the best decisions I'd ever made, is running for school committee, because it got me connected to all of the political players throughout the city and actually in the region. Actually, Elizabeth Warren sat with me about my school committee run, which I was very, very pleased about. Maybe she'll do it again, I don't know.
Sure.
So that actually got me connected politically, so that whenever there was any issue with the city, any issue with the public schools or anything, I knew who to go to and could affect change that way. And actually several of the things that I ran on last cycle did get changed, like the lack of a full-time nurse in every school.
Mm-hmm.
That was changed, and a few other things like that.
You mentioned you've been in Worcester for 10 years now, so is that a South Boston accent I'm hearing?
It is way south,
Yeah,
way south. So I grew up in Alabama, and
All right.
all my family's in New Orleans, so my accent's a little bit mixed. Like in Alabama, they ask me where I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
In New Orleans, they ask me where I'm from.
Yeah.
In Worcester, guess what?
Some curiosity.
So yeah, no, it's fun. It's fun.
So the second question we ask is the school funding question. That Worcester is owed in excess of $100 million due to the state underfunding our school system previously. What do you propose in order to retrieve the monies rightfully owed our city? How long before Worcester is repaid in full? What kind of offer from the state would satisfy you that we wouldn't have to sue them?
Right. I do like the proposed Promise Act. I think that it's really difficult to get any sort of money back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's extremely difficult, but I do think that we can make a real argument for equitable funding. And there was a recent article with the Lincoln Street principal talking about the lack of funding for her school. And you just look at that school and you recognize, they don't have a gymnasium, they don't have a cafeteria. She described going to Home Depot and buying a shower board and posting it in front of chalkboards in order for them to have a marker board. And that's a real shame. That's a real shame. And I don't know any legislators who would argue that that should be the case, that should happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be my approach, is say, look at the inequitable funding here. We have to do something about it, and then approach it that way.
It makes sense to me. No, that's we've only done a handful of these so far, and that's the same viewpoint I think everyone is probably going to have. The idea of clawing back $100 million from a state that is getting ready to turn the lights off in Beacon Hill for budget woes that's not a...
As long as there's $100 million out there, that's our $100 million, Brendan.
I guess it makes sense, right? That the city has to go through the motions of, say, talking a lawsuit or whatnot. We're not just going to ignore the money, but you have a better chance of taking whatever's in the school department budget next year, buying Powerball tickets, and hoping to get the money back from the state that way, which isn't a terrible idea, to be honest with you. There should probably be a little bit of a carve-out for lottery tickets
Sure.
For school funding, at least. But
There's something to be said for that. There is something to be said for that. But I think, really go into each of the legislators and say, look, here's the deal. It's not fair that these kids, and especially in our school system, have to make ends meet in such a way that and you go to school systems like Harvard or various other areas, and they're just flush.
You go with cash, yeah.
You
And
know?
it's that's one of those areas too where I think there are some interesting intersections as well as some other things happening locally with various political and social movement, like Moms Out Front, right? Like if we know that if their focus is on the energy sector and some of the flaws with the energy sector, and we also know that there are more subsidies on a federal level going to the fossil fuel industry than there is funding for public education nationally.
That's right.
That's it seems like a pretty easy conversation to have, and especially dealing with the legislature.
John, what's important for people to know about the academic outcomes of our schools, and what's important for people to know about discipline in our schools?
Well, I think as far as academic outcomes, there's multiple things that we should be worried about. I think that actually graduation rates should be something that we worry about. There is some evidence that shows that if you put money towards just the graduation rates, that money can go further than money towards like the AP programs and that sort of thing. Not to say that we're not going to fund the AP programs, but I think we need to focus more on funding for kids that are going to stay in Worcester. I think there's a lot of things that we can do for economic development around like STEAM education and more vocational programming at all of the high schools. With the wait list for tech, I think it makes a lot of sense for us to look at the funding for vocational programming at each of the high schools and see what we can do. From what I understand, the way that tech was funded, it was not funded through the Chapter 70, through the vocational funding program. It was funded as an independent school, and so there may well be additional funds that we could tap to fund additional programming at each of the schools. And I think that's valuable, and that would benefit the kids that are going to stay here, the kids who need vocational programming. I actually, when I went to high school, went through a mixed school, so it was half vocational, half high school, and I benefited tremendously. So I actually became an EMT in high school because of this vocational program, so that I could work in a hospital, became a second level, which they don't have anymore, and then was able to work in an ICU and then in research so that I could put myself through college. And that matters.
I've always been jealous of people who went to school in those programs. One friend of mine went to a college that had that kind of a thing, and so she graduated college as with a pre-veterinary degree, also as a certified forklift driver. And so, and so she was able to be like, am I ready to go to vet school? And if not, do I just want to like make some good union money driving a forklift for a couple of years and maybe get that money for vet school together, or whatever, or until if I want to do something else. Like I'm coming out of college with a very marketable skill like that.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is it doesn't really. I mean, it does matter what technical or what vocational program you go, because it needs to be something that you're interested in. It needs to be something that excites you. But pretty much it doesn't matter as far as like specifically. So it doesn't matter that I'm no longer in the AMT. I actually benefited from that program because it put me through school, but also because of all the different things it exposed me to. So now I work in at the medical school and for the hospital system in the Office of Diversity. So it's not the diversity part that I learned about, but actually the health system.
Yeah.
So I learned about all of, the EMT programs require you to do a variety of rotations throughout the system, and including, actually the retirement centers and things like that. So all the things that I learned, I still retain and I still use today because of where I work. So to your point, maybe they won't be a forklift operator, but maybe there are aspects of that job that they can then use in later life in veterinary tech school or whatever. Maybe it's the idea of how they communicate with each other in the warehouse. So, I think there's value no matter what the vocational program is. If the students are interested in doing a vocational program, why wouldn't you offer that to them? It doesn't make any sense right now, though. They don't have. Not all students have that opportunity.
No, and it's really interesting too. From you guys are transplants here. When I was growing up, in terms of high school and technical education, Worcester Voc was pretty much our alternative school. Mm-hmm. You didn't go there because you were really interested in auto shop, or you were interested in welding. You went there because administration from a middle school, in all likelihood, considered you to be a risk to the general population, or that there was some other not many people went there with the best of intentions, unfortunately. It really was treated as an outcast school. Now our current tech program, which is so competitive to get into, I've had actually a really hard time finding this information, but it seems as though there's as strong a push to go to college after tech as there is in any other of our high schools. Not so much a focus on we just handed you a career. Again, I'm in this weird spot where as an adult, I wish I had the opportunity to learn how to weld. My 20-year-old Jeep needs a bunch of work done to it now. And if someone taught me how to work a torch, I wouldn't be shopping around for auto body places to do this work for me.
Yeah, arc welding is much better.
Well, whatever the case may be, I would have learned that had somebody given me the opportunity. And it's, I had a similar experience to you, but in a different path, where I worked as an EMT right out of high school, or not too long thereafter. But it was something I had to find on my own, and it was something I loved. I don't think I've had a job since that I actually enjoyed as much as that.
Wow.
But it also, where I am today, is very much a byproduct of that path being presented to me, which otherwise would never have encountered had not some friends actually said, "Hey, you should take a look at this really cool opportunity." And not just one of the best 5 years of my life, but directly correlates to where I am today.
Yeah, and I think there is something about that would speak to economic development in the city. I think that if you have folks, whether it be a path to college or a path just to work, either one is fine. In fact, now with the way that college education works, the way that jobs work, in 10 years they might go back to school for something. Yeah. We know that people don't stay in jobs the way that they used to.
Totally.
So now it's 3 to 5 years. Well, in 3 to 5 years, maybe they'll move on and do something else. But they'll be at a higher level than if they exited high school with just with just a diploma.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do we need to circle back and talk specifically about discipline in schools?
So yes, sorry. So as far as discipline in schools go, I think that we need to look at the way that the system operates, and the way that the system treats classes of people or groups of kids. So it's very clear from the summary data that I've seen and from all of the stories in the community that people of color are treated differently than the rest of the population. Why is that? Well, that's what the numbers are for. That's why we need the full data. And that's what I would do, is look at the full data and say, okay, how does this apply to our policies? How does this apply to our system? Because I think the real problem is that folks are not taking, I wouldn't say everybody, but I think what I would do, that's a better way to put it, what I would do is take a systems approach. So working in the Office of Diversity, that's what we do in our office, is look at the system and say, okay, what is it that we can do? How can we change the system, not an individual, but the system, and then look at our policies and look at what we're doing and look at all the programming, look at our employment rates, look at all the different things that we're doing, and then how can we weave a comprehensive plan that would change the system in a positive way. So I think that the problems that are in our schools today have been there for quite some time.
Sure.
And I don't think anybody would argue that. And I think that that's what we need to do, is sort of take a more healthy approach of, this has been a problem that's been in existence for quite some time, and so it's going to take quite some time to fix it. but we need to get together as a community and fix it, not not in isolation.
So you mentioned your some work experience that maybe is relevant here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I work in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at UMass Medical School, and that serves not just the medical school but also the health system. And with that job, we do look at a systems approach for diversity. So I actually manage the employee resource groups and diversity councils. But I also do some work for LGBT inclusion, so I'm on the LGBT task force for the health system, where we're trying to correct for some issues that are known. And so that's what we're doing, is we're providing education where it belongs, and then we've attacked all of the policies so that our policies no longer perpetuate any issues. And part of the policy is like, okay, what's the employment what's the employment education that we're requiring as part of our policy? What are the standards that we're requiring our employees to treat patients? And then what is it that we can do about a particular system that'll make a difference? For example, when you enter into a clinic, now we teach them to not use pronouns, because when you assume someone's pronouns, you very often could be incorrect. And there's no reason to assume a pronoun. You ask a person, how would you like to be called? Usually they'll tell you their pronoun if it's different than what they think you might assume, or they'll say a name, and that's the name that you use. And so it's a rather simple approach, but it's not one that folks my age or older are used to using.
Definitely not. Yeah. My age neither. Brenda, were you going to say something?
My age neither.
My age. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to talk English here, man.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Well, no. I'm agreeing with you. I was just repeating you. I figured we'd just go down the line and all be in agreement. But yeah, that actually is a tough. It's amazing though how hostile, I think, because I'll speak for myself from just an generational perspective, how hostile you can be to a change, but when you stop and actually think about the change, you realize that your hostility comes simply from a place you feel like you're under attack because someone is trying to change the language you use without realizing for a minute, it's just pausing for a minute, realizing the impact it has on another human being, and then realizing, I'm the jerk again. Well,
it's interesting that you point that out, because when I've talked to various clinics about that in particular, their response generally from an older generation, from my generation or older, is to say, well, that's a form of respect. I address them by their pronouns as a form of respect. And I'm like, well, so if someone called you the opposite gender that you believe that you are, would you find that offensive? Of course I would. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And it is rather simple, but it's not what we were used to. It's not what we sort of have been ingrained to believe, or ingrained to use. But when you just stop and say, okay, what's the minimum? What's the minimum here? Just like actually with employment, what's the minimum so that we can hire someone who's qualified for the job, but is represents the diversity of our community? It's like, well, okay, so the minimum is that you address them by the name that they either ask of you or the last name, one or the other.
Yeah. All right. It's interesting we got an agenda there, because the next question is, what do you think about sex education, John?
Well, so I think comprehensive sex ed is very, very important. So I've actually just been elected to the board of directors for Planned Parenthood of Massachusetts.
Oh, congratulations.
It'll start in July, but I think that's very, very important. I also think, though, that we should take into account our community. So I think there's part of comprehensive sex ed that, there's not really a question about, like teaching of consent, teaching of healthy relationships, teaching of relationships that are not mainstream but that are still healthy. But then, in certain religions, there are parts of the comprehensive sex ed that that are offensive to religions, and so we need to keep that into account. We need to take that into account. So maybe there's part of the curriculum that folks can opt out of, and maybe there's part that they can't. I'm not sure, but I'm really a fan of the panel idea that our mayor proposed. And you know,
Tell me about this, because I ignore all school policy issues, so I have no idea what you're talking about.
okay, great. So you know, with the last when they tried to approve.
We'll call it this most recent fiasco.
Yeah. See, I was trying to be polite.
I'll say the rude stuff. I'm happy to do that.
But I think that what happened was the mayor saw that there was a clear lack of community engagement.
Sure.
And so how do you engage the community, engage the professional folks who understand this and who understand the research behind what works education-wide and what doesn't, and get everybody together and talk about, okay, what's going to work for Worcester? So we need representation from our religious communities. We need representation from our, you know, from the sort of professional class, and then we need representation from key stakeholders like, you know, teachers, like, you know, administrators, and like parent groups, and actually we need to hear from our students too. You know, they need to all be a part of this panel. And then I believe, and you know, maybe I'm wrong, we'll find out, but I believe that that would be a nice way that we could come up with a solution that helps everybody, and so no one feels left out, so no one feels like they were ignored or left out of the discussion, or, you know, not given a seat at the table, as they say.
Careful with the answer to this question, because I don't want you to burn yourself with anybody, but I think it's an important thing to articulate. With the last fiasco regarding comprehensive sex ed in the city, do you feel as though the opposition to that proposal was genuinely you know, a representation of the city as a whole, or was it just a loud and vocal minority that did a really, really good job manipulating the system to ensure that that comprehensive program did not make its way through?
So I will say that I think the vast majority of folks are for a comprehensive sex ed that is research based and that sort of thing. However, I did hear from religious community groups and their vocalization of what they found objectionable, I thought was legitimate. You know, and so there needs to be some sort of middle ground, I think.
But we do have, you know, at least we have a framework for being able to give somebody an exemption from a curriculum or a vaccination if for religious grounds or whatnot. So.
But when I was in school, we had, believe it or not, in Alabama, sex ed, and we were given...
Take note, Worcester, that is the guy from the deep south that is trying to give us a hand here. Yeah,
that's right. So, but we were given an exemption. So my mother opted us out, and we were given an exemption.
Sure.
So the exemption included us being given time in the library.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right.
No, an exemption, in my mind, if someone was to find a healthy path to an exemption for religious reasons still includes a health curriculum that fills in some sort of gap. And I think, to your point, that's where a panel, I think, comes in handy. Like, what are you not going to find objectionable?
That's right.
Because it also is important, too, I think, from a general society perspective, it's very possible that we have religious groups that would find things objectionable that, as a whole, we just can't allow to slide, right? Like, we're getting to a point where, you know, vaccinations might be in that realm, right? Like, we can't have a measles outbreak because someone's objecting to...
For example, consent. For example, healthy relationships. And all that includes.
Basic levels of biology as well, too. Like that, you know,
absolutely.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. But you know, some of the other things, you know, maybe. But I think you're right that, you know, if you maybe push that part over into health, then sure. Then if you talk about consent and if you talk about healthy relationships, but that's not being discussed now.
Right. Yeah, so, and I'm with you. Again, I from just a strictly a person where I stand, like, I don't see any problem with anything the city. If anything, I think the city is being a little bit too conservative in terms of what they had been pushing forward.
Oh, absolutely.
But that's me, and I know I don't reflect the whims of the general public. So that's where my question was coming from. I am I'm finding in my personal circles of parents with children, not a lot of opposition. Maybe some people a little bit squicked out, but I think in a lot of ways, almost relieved. Oh, thank God this is coming off of my plate, like sort of thing, which also is a little bit weird to me. I haven't found a lot of people that had any significant opposition to the original proposal. Yet it seemed like it was a very, very vocal segment of the population. I'm still just trying to figure out if maybe that's a universe that I've yet to tap in the city, and I don't claim to know everybody here. There's 200,000 people, but
that may well be. But I think even beyond the ones that were there, even beyond the sort of, beyond the religious groups that I saw show up there, I know that there are religious communities that reached out to me
Good.
and said, "Hey, John, what is this about? We haven't heard of this. Why is this not being discussed in our community, like in the mosques and those sorts of things?" And so out over this summer, I plan to sit down with the imam at the Worcester Islamic Center and talk about it.
Yeah.
And say, okay, well now tell me what it is. And it's not the imam didn't reach out to me. It was lay leaders, but nonetheless, they have kids in our system.
Yeah, and that's huge, because if we actually are going to try and be inclusive, then that's we got to tick off that box as well. Yeah.
So there's where it is to me. I think for the average, Worcester voter, I think you're right that there's probably not much objection.
More confusion as to why Alabama ticked this box off when you were a kid. We're still getting around to it in Massachusetts.
Right.
No offense to Alabama,
right.
I should. This is totally irrelevant. So if this is something you want to talk about, feel free. Why did your mom opt you out of sex ed? Were your parents? Were they like more conservative than the program, or more liberal than the program, or just?
So we were in Alabama for a reason.
Okay.
My mom was very conservative. She still is.
Oh, okay.
She still is.
So they were just like uncomfortable with this whole.
Yeah. So it's like non-denominational holiness kind of fundamentalist church, and so it was like a little bit more extreme than your average fundamentalist church.
Okay. Good deal. What's your experience with the education policy, and what in your life has helped you understand how your decisions would affect our 25,000 students?
So I think having seen multiple systems helps. But so my undergraduate degree is actually in psychology, and my graduate degree is actually a degree in fine art, but it's a teaching degree. So as part of that program, we learned how to teach, as well as the art program itself. So I understand teaching from that perspective. Now they were teaching us to teach college level, not K through 12, and it's a very different system. I actually taught as a substitute teacher for middle school in art as an undergrad, and that was a frightful experience.
How long did you do that for?
Almost a full semester, so the spring semester. And I had forgotten how traumatic middle school was until I did that experience. But nonetheless, it helped me understand a little bit better sort of what teachers go through, and even well, I guess it's not really a shock, but in Alabama there wasn't a huge amount of funding for art, but they did have art programs, so to sort of segue just a little bit, I think STEAM education is one of the things that we should really be focusing on in the schools, because STEAM is science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, and the art actually brings up all of the other disciplines, and there's a fair amount of research that points to that. So I think that matters. I think my previous run matters, and then just like looking through, as I've my experience running for school committee, and then my experience with our kids in this system, specifically Worcester system. So my son has been in the Worcester Public Schools since kindergarten, and it's interesting. It's interesting to watch. Both my kids are brown, and it's interesting to when they join a new school one son is in a special ed program and the other one's in an AP program, and so they're sort of very different ends of the spectrum. And it's interesting to me to get a call from the school where they don't know me and then talk to me. Their attitude sort of changes. So, one of my sons has social behavioral issues, and that's why he's in the special program. And it's interesting to me that there was a proposal of discipline based on behaviors that got him in the program.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was fascinating. But as soon as I had a conversation with him, one time I had to actually go into the school to talk to them. But in general, just a phone call where they understand who they're talking to matters. And I think that it's unfortunate, right? So I think that how much you're able to advocate for your child matters, and that it's not a shock.
Sure, and then plenty of times, a kid falls through the cracks or a kid isn't being handled quite right, and who's going to notice unless the parent calls out? Hopefully the people there notice, but people make mistakes. People have limited resources.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is the one thing that I find myself as my own child gets older that is so easy to take for granted, that the ability to advocate and know how both my parents were educators. So knowing how to navigate that system is that's just what I grew up around. Yeah. Realizing that not everybody, one, knows how to do that, or two, even has the resources, the wherewithal to do that is horrifying. Because again, as you said, if you weren't the parent that someone could reach out to or knew on your own to reach out on behalf of your child to advocate, then what happens? It's
right. So I actually, as in high school, I have asthma and allergies and stuff, and so I had a fair amount of medical issues. But my mother didn't know how to advocate for me, and I almost couldn't graduate from high school because of all the days that I missed being sick. But luckily, I was able to advocate for myself. But that was a real lesson for me on what happens when you have parents who don't know the system, and most don't. It takes somebody a lot of time to learn how the system works, and then learn how to work the system so that it works for your child. Just like the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, those are pretty difficult to navigate if you don't understand how the system works. And since I've run this, have been running this last cycle, I've heard more and more from parents of kids with IEPs, and they're like, I've got an IEP, but my kid's not getting what they need. Right. What do I need to do differently? And we would talk through their individual issues. But it is interesting that even with an IEP, you're not guaranteed.
No, and without, especially being able to navigate a system that has changed as much as it has over the last 10 to 20 years, even if you thought you knew how that system worked 20 years ago, that's not in the same system anymore. And just one last thought, Mike, too, that I wanted to share.
You mentioned share more than one.
No, just to reinforce the idea of STEAM programming and whatnot. That I had a funny experience this weekend where I brought my son down to Lakeside. Joyner Lucas was filming a music video down there.
Oh man!
But it was awesome. The whole day was incredible. But the one thing that really stood out to me was we have all these notions as to what success looks like. And it's I think if you take a middle class sort of view of how you define success, tying in with your thought on why we need arts programming in the schools, it was the guy who was late to his own video shoot because he had to sign paperwork on the $270,000 Ferrari Spider convertible to pull up in front of his old apartment complex at Lakeside, actually is the person who defines success by middle class terms, right?
Sure.
I don't think Joyner's even hit 30 yet, and he was picking up a new Ferrari that day, right? If you live on the west side of Worcester and you consider yourself to be someone who's putting your child on the path to success, that's actually what you're looking for on some weird level, whether you realize it or not, in most cases. And it's just amazing that Joyner was a South High graduate. I don't even know what he had access to for arts and music programming over there, but imagine if there was more. If there was more of it, maybe it wouldn't even have taken this long to actually become as big of a success as he is in the city. And it's something that is so easy to discount. It's always the first thing to go, right? Arts and music programming, always the first thing to get cut. But it's terrifying when you think of how many young people are out there that could be their path, not just to success in that universe, but helping them think through, as you said, engineering doesn't make sense without creative thinking.
Right.
Even high levels of mathematics is as much creativity and philosophy. Where we think of flashcards as being mathematics, but that's only because most of us never make it far enough into mathematics to realize that it is all philosophy and crazy nonsense once you get to the higher levels in academia and whatnot.
Right.
It's amazing how we discount the things that actually lend themselves to high levels of learning and success. But
Yeah, one of the neat things
it's a great Ferrari too.
that
It's a gorgeous car.
one of the neat things actually Darcy Schwartz with Art Reach has done is she's gone out and fundraised to put artists in the schools in the after school program, and it's a really, really neat program. So I taught, as an artist, I taught the artists about diversity and sort of how to address students and things of that nature. But it was really, really cool that she actually made sure that these artists were paid to do programming in the schools, an after school program inside the schools. But the really cool thing that I was very proud of this part of the program is that they focused on open and welcoming schools, so all art projects were related to open and welcoming schools. So, I mean, there are ways that you can sort of, hybrid and build off of other things.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, so mathematics, engineering, all sorts of things, technology are all, you're not successful if you're not creative at them. And, with the way that, YouTube and things of that nature are really skyrocketing, it would be worthwhile to look at how that is programmed into the schools as well.
And we started with funding, so obviously we can be clear that there isn't always easy money for those kinds of programs, but that's where we don't have to go too far back. I grew up when my elementary school days was just pre-Ritalin, right? So I was fortunate enough to take part in what was called the PEAK program back then, which was an arts and education program where it was funded from the Mass Lottery Council. Those of us that couldn't sit still, they took us out of class, and we would put on plays. We would spend a semester up at Higgins Armory studying a different level of history. There were so many things that we did. It was and it was probably one of the best experiences I had in elementary school, realizing that if your brain maybe works a little bit in a funny way or a little bit differently than the kids who can sit still and are fine studying flashcards, that doesn't mean you're weird or you're outcast. It just means your brain works a little bit differently. And there's, my favorite example of that was sixth grade. Gary Hagenbush was my sixth grade teacher.
Okay.
He built the entire curriculum that year around Shel Silverstein. It was whether we were doing mathematics, whether we were doing history, everything was tied into Shel Silverstein. And it was the most, my class growing up, we were very, very tight. We were all very, very weird. And also, now that we're in our 40s, I think everybody ended up pretty successful along their path too. Mm-hmm. But he was the one teacher that sticks out as someone that realized, these cats aren't going to be the ones to sit still and sit. So he took this thing out of left field and built an entire curriculum around it, and we were wrapped. We didn't move. We were so tied in. And sixth grade is one of those weird years where you're giving up, especially in Worcester. It's a transition year. You're kind of giving up on things, but we didn't, and he lured us in, hook, line, and sinker, and it was amazing stuff.
I'm going to ask you about this another day because I feel like I want to hear the whole hour and a half story. Quantum mechanics or whatever.
I don't even know where Gary is
Early
now.
American history.
He's one of the most fascinating teachers I ever had. And
very creative, it sounds like.
Yeah. So speaking of being creative. Brent crude oil is $62 a barrel, up 4% on the week and down 17% on the year. Bitcoin is $9,000, up 12% on the week and up 37% on the year.
This is Jack Dorsey stuff going on here.
Is that who's doing it?
Well, it's Jack Dorsey from Square. They just pulled somebody from Google, an old school Alphabet employee, to manage the Bitcoin program for Square, and they seem to be going all in. It's a really interesting system that they're looking at, a mix of, he's come out in the last couple of weeks, with a claim that he's fully focused on their Square app replacing cash, the Square Cash app, replacing traditional cash payments, but using Bitcoin seemingly as a back end to float a lot of the funding that's going on in that system. It's neat stuff.
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
Facebook's jumping in. With
Although, that's Yeah, I don't read. All I do is read the commodities numbers on these, so I never have any idea why these things are going up or down, or what's the story. The Facebook thing, I feel like I've read a little bit about, but
Only a little bit.
the Square thing, I had no idea. So John, how much can you bench
Around 250.
these days, or lifetime?
Oh, these days, yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, well, we have a little gym in our house, so.
Do you feel like right now you're kind of like at your lifetime max, or when you were younger it was higher?
No. Well, I don't recall if I could ever do 250 when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So when I was in high school, I played football. But I don't know that I could do 250 back then.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of gradually, as my weight has gone up, it's gradually gone up. Because you're supposed to be able to bench your weight. So.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you're supposed to be able to. Many people's goal to be able to. Yeah.
I love the idea that there are plenty of us out there that could probably beat the tar out of our teenage self. Do you feel that way?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, I would slaughter me at 18, 19 years of age.
Yeah, although I was a little bit wired differently back then. I'm a lot more calm now.
Yeah. Well, the drugs
I can do it just because
in my case, anyways. I'm not speaking I wasn't running for office, but in my case, the drugs are very different. So
I can do it just because I'm meaner now. I think my 15-year-old self or whatever would have been stronger in every way. But my 15-year-old self would have been like, "Are we going to fight?" And my 46-year-old self would have just immediately punched my 15-year-old self in the throat as an answer. And my 15-year-old self would be like, "Wait a second,
We're supposed to bump fists first.
What is this? Yeah. What is this?" And you haven't seen The Wire. We like to ask people favorite character on The Wire, but you haven't really watched the show.
Yeah.
I feel like the last time we had you on the show, we had the same sad answer to this question, maybe.
I, with 2 kids, a full-time job.
You don't have to explain why you haven't seen a TV show. I mean,
I just don't. I generally don't watch TV.
Yeah.
I do occasionally watch things on YouTube, but that's about it.
Since you're back to bow ties, and the question is always, who's your favorite character from The Wire? Can we just
Brother Mazone.
We'll give him Brother Mazone and just.
Yeah, but he's not wearing a bow tie.
No, but you are. As I'm saying, in the celebration of you going back to bow ties, and
are you aware of Brother Mazone? I could talk for a long time about Brother Mazone. I don't know if we have that much time left on the show.
I got work to do today, Mike. We can't talk all day about Brother Mazone.
All right. He's a cool character. He's a beloved character.
Well then, that sounds like that might fit.
Yeah. Probably former member of the Nation of Islam, but no more. Yeah. Yeah. Boy. Well, we got a couple extra minutes on the show. John, I want to just.
How's that possible? I feel like
because we don't always run over. I mean, there's a education story going on this week that I'll just bring these numbers up in case one of us has something interesting to say. The organization Mass Budget has a report out called "Towards Equity: School Funding Reform in Massachusetts." The Telegram Gazette headline on this is "Lawmakers offer nearly $1 billion more than governor for school districts." Mass Budget was looking at the proposal by the legislature and the proposal by the governor, and the current setup that would happen if nobody voted on any new proposals. And in 2019, the state gave us $253 million towards the schools on a foundation budget of $353 million. By 2026, if we didn't change anything, that would go from 253 to 324 from the state. The governor's proposal would bring that. Oh man, whatever's my glasses. The governor's proposal would bring that to 358, so bigger than 324, and the legislature's proposal would bring that to 432, which would be like $74 million more than the governor's proposal, and not quite twice as much as the 2019 number, but heading that direction. Your thoughts, John?
Well,
bigger numbers are better when it comes to money.
Clearly, we need to go with the legislature.
I have problems with my printer today, and everything is like printing the wrong aspect ratio. So I'm like, with my glasses, I could definitely read these numbers, but here I can't do it, man. I'm getting old.
John, do you have any related to that? And I'm not going to try and put you on the spot here, but just in general,
But
do you have, as a candidate, do you have any strong? Well, no. I guess here's so 74. Say the legislature gets its way. $74 million come into the city. Conceivably, the principal at Lincoln Street Elementary School won't have to be going to Home Depot to buy whiteboards. That's a win. But at the same time, do you have any strong feelings on things like standardized testing, standardized curriculums and whatnot that also seem to eat up a lot of the funds for that come into us?
I've been really disappointed this year with the massive amount of standardized testing that an 8th grader must go through.
We both own one.
Weeks and weeks and weeks. So I think that because and it's less so now, but in order to get into college, you must do some form of standardized tests. So therefore, I think you need to know globally how to take a standardized test. But do we really need, 9 weeks of standardized testing? Like, so there was standardized testing to place in high school, and then there was at least 3 other banks of standardized testing, and that doesn't include, like, each test has its own components. So I think it's unfortunate that we've sort of swung the pendulum too far, that I think there is just far too much standardized testing at this point. And so I think it would, we need to take a rational approach.
Yeah, that's another area where I would just be fascinated to see, both on a local and a state level, how much funding is absorbed to meet requirements from standardized curriculums and standardized testing. Like, there has to be...
That would be interesting to me too, because, not only do you have to, not only is it the amount of time that that standardized testing is taking up, but how much does that standardized test cost?
Right.
And then how much does the prep work cost? And then how much does it cost to bring all the teachers up to par on that? And then how much does it cost to test the teachers to see that they're up to par and things of that nature? And so I think that very well could be a cost savings. I think that, maybe more art, less standardized testing would be mine.
Unfortunately, there's no room for Shel Silverstein when it comes to Park. There's no Shel Silverstein questions at all. I also have an 8th grader, or just, he finished yesterday, going off to high school now, and that...
Rising freshman, as they say.
As a terrible parent, I made sure he understood from the first year MCAS was a thing for him, that, buddy, this isn't your test. This is the teacher's test. So if you feel like taking a nap, that's fine. I don't want you to... the last thing I wanted... I was already seeing kids who were like, they were having panic attacks, anxiety issues over standardized tests. I just wanted to make sure he understood, this is not on you. They're going to make you feel as though it's on you, but by statute, it's not on you.
Right.
Coming full circle, I think where I realized that there was some degree of decent parenting going on there was this year in 8th grade, where he said, my wife and I, that is it not weird that we're spending weeks reviewing for MCAS or Park, whatever it's called now, when that test itself is supposed to be a review of what we already learned. Like, it actually, the system is so bizarre at this point, where it doesn't even seem to be self-aware enough to realize that if you're actually testing anything that's based on your existing curriculum, you shouldn't need to do a rush review the weeks leading up to it and put the rest of the curriculum on hold just to make sure that test is going to be as successful as possible. That's what the previous 6 months should have been about, if there's any relationship at all between the testing and the curriculum that we're delivering. But
the previous 6 months were to prepare for the
standardized test.
So, John, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
good luck
appreciate
with
it.
you. Good luck
Great
with the
seeing you.
election.
Thank you very much.
Brendan, thanks for being on the show too.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see everybody next week. Bye-bye, guys.